74% of people actually say they tune into podcasts to learn something new. Over 90% of people who start podcasts stop around podcast 10. I genuinely believe that unless you're consistent on a weekly basis, you're not going to grow. 74% of people actually say they tune into podcasts to learn something new. I know that was accurate for me. I really love listening to Diary of a CEO because I find like his interviews just with different, they're not always CEOs, but their life experiences. And I think when you listen to those kind of actionable podcasts, you always walk away with a new idea or something new that you want to implement. Just to give, and it could be in anything. So just to give like a very random example, but I can't even remember which CEO it was, but on the Diary of a CEO, there was an interview taking place and someone mentioned that the concept of gratitude chats. And I loved it. I loved the idea. And like the next day I was like, I'm going to try that. And I started a gratitude WhatsApp group in our company. And I've seen the difference. And I can honestly say that idea came from a podcast, so I'm very conscious of, if I'm, feeding myself information or spending the time, that it needs to be something that I can actually leverage or utilize in my day-to-day life. Generally, I'm a believer of consistency. I'm a believer of once you start, you don't stop, because I think people forget you in between. That's my logic. I genuinely believe that unless you're consistent on a weekly basis, you're not going to grow. I'm not sure of the exact statistic, but I think it's as high as over 90% of people who start podcasts actually stop around podcast 10, right? So there's a whole flurry of people who are like, oh, I'm going to start. And then when they realize just how much hard work it takes, they start to fizzle off. So I definitely have huge respect for anyone who's doing it on a consistent basis and revisiting it and making sure it stays alive. I know it is work. And I think it's about getting to that tipping point where it can become your business and you grow that visibility as well. I personally, I've been talking about doing a podcast for years, but I did nothing about it because I'm a busy person and I didn't prioritize it. But now, video is part of this. I can do video. That's a realm I understand. And that's kind of encouraged me. But for me, another thing that really motivated me is seeing how some of these platforms are now really embracing video. So I know like Spotify in particular, they now have a whole bunch of features that are specific for podcasters, which I think is awesome. But not just that, YouTube recently added a podcast playlist, which means they're also trying to actively promote podcasts, get into that space. And that makes me really think, given that YouTube is kind of the largest search engine out there, that's going to do wonders for your reach when you're creating podcasts and you're leveraging the YouTube platform. What I'm seeing more and more like on my Instagram feed are all these teasers of everyone's podcast. But that generally is where I first come across someone. Like I'm not sitting there, maybe that's just me, but I'm not sitting there scrolling, through Google and trying to figure out, which podcast am I going to subscribe to today? I tend to be on a social platform like Instagram, see these short teasers and snippets, which that's the purpose of them. They've been produced to catch my attention. Now I'm like hooked, and now I'm like, I'm going to check this conversation out. And then I go and explore a podcast. The video is what I feel hooks the new audience in. So what I find really interesting is the fact that, believe it or not, we were offering podcasting. 5 years ago, mainly because I love podcasts. I was very into it and I was like, this is the trend. Now is the time. Everybody's going to want a podcast. If I'm honest about it, I think we had a handful of customers who actually took us up on that offer. But still, it was quite exciting. We're doing a podcast for so-and-so. But at that time, it was really frustrating for me because I think video first. And we had these interviews going on that would go on for hours. And I'm like, oh my God, we've now got all these hours that we need to edit. And because I was thinking video first, that how do we make this interesting? They're chatting for a whole hour. And I think what's been normalized now are videos like this. I'm promoting video all day long, and I really genuinely believe that when people see you on camera, they get a very different feel about you. And as a result, like I've had situations, I know we've touched on this before, I've had situations where I'm in a mall and someone's like, oh, I've been watching your videos. And I'm like, oh my God, really? And you forget that you're putting this content out there and it's consumed by people you don't know. And let alone when you add like the podcast element and you're having more natural conversation, I think it just makes you feel, I mean, I feel like I know the people I listen to. I've never met them, but I feel that way, right? I think for me, I still come back to people often enjoy consuming content that's educational or entertainment. So how can you add value in the podcast you're putting out there? So be conscious about the fact that you're taking people's time and make sure that they have something actionable or a takeaway from that. So definitely the education element. I think the second is the consistency. I do feel that consistency is key for you to stay top of mind and to grow and to eventually be in a space where you can have those brand partnerships and start monetizing it. And the third for me is the marketing. I think the marketing matters. So I think understanding that no matter what duration your podcast is, having that 1 minute snippet on social is where you're going to attract a new audience. So be very conscious of how you market, where you market, who you bring onto your podcast who can help you market, and just make the most of the effort that you're putting in.